She snapped her fingers at him the way you'd snap at a dog that wandered too close to the table. You. Yes, you. In the cheap vest. There's wine on the floor and a senator about to step in it. So unless you want to explain to my insurance company why a man in a tuxedo broke his hip at the Halewood Gala, I suggest you get down there and clean it up. Now. Elias Quinn looked at the dark stains spreading across the white marble, then at the woman who had said it. Vivian Sterling, 34 years old, the most photographed face in the room, wearing a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than the truck he'd driven here in. She wasn't even looking at him anymore. She'd already turned back to the cluster of glittering people around her, certain the problem was being handled the way she was certain of most things. So Elias got down on one knee on the cold floor of the grand ballroom, in front of 300 of the wealthiest people in the city, and began to wipe up the wine that someone else had spilled. A few of the guests near the table watched. One of them, a man with a laugh like a car alarm, said something to his companion, and they both chuckled. A woman lifted her phone, then thought better of it, then lifted it again. Elias didn't look up. He wiped the marble until it shone, gathered the broken glass into a cloth napkin so no one would cut themselves, and rose without a word. What none of them knew, what not one person in that vast, chandelier-drenched room could have guessed, was that 90 minutes from now, a man named Theodore Abernathy would walk up to the microphone on that stage, hold a single index card in his trembling old hands, and read aloud the name of the anonymous benefactor whose secret gift had built this entire foundation. The man the whole evening was secretly designed to honor. The man every powerful person in that ballroom had spent the night quietly hoping to impress. And when Theodore Abernathy read that name, Vivian Sterling's champagne flute would slip out of her fingers and shatter against the marble, the very marble she'd just made a waiter kneel on. But here's the strange part. When that glass broke, not one head in the room turned toward the sound. Every single person turned to look at the waiter, to understand how a quiet man in a borrowed vest ended up on his knees in front of the people who owed him everything. You have to go back to the start of that day, because it didn't begin with a ballroom. It began with a missing shoe. The morning Elias Quinn's life rearranged itself started the way most of his mornings started, with a 7-year-old standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding exactly one shoe, and announcing the absence of the other as though it were a national emergency. Dad, it's gone. It's just gone. Shoes don't disappear. You said matter doesn't disappear. You said that. I said matter is conserved, Elias said, sliding a plate of eggs across the counter. I didn't say your left sneaker obeys the laws of physics. It clearly doesn't. Maisie Quinn glared at him over the top of the shoe, which was a remarkable thing for a child her size to manage. She had her mother's eyes, that exact gray-green that went darker when she was thinking hard, and her mother's habit of arguing with the universe like it owed her an explanation. He found a shoe under the couch. It was always under the couch. They both knew it was always under the couch, which is why he simply walked over, reached under without breaking stride, and held it out to her like a magician completing a trick he'd performed 10,000 times. Magic, she said flatly. Engineering, he said. They lived in a narrow second-floor apartment above a bakery, which meant the whole place smelled like warm bread by 6 in the morning, and the rent was just barely survivable. There was a drawing taped to the refrigerator of 3 stick figures, a tall one, a small one, and a third that Maisie always drew slightly off to the side, holding a heart. She never explained the third one, and he never asked. He knew who it was. His phone buzzed against the counter. He glanced at it and felt his stomach do the small, uncomfortable thing it had been doing for 3 weeks now, ever since the letter had arrived. The screen read, T. Abernathy. He didn't pick it up, not because he was avoiding the old man. Theodore Abernathy was, in some quiet and complicated way, the closest thing Elias had to a friend in the world he'd left behind, but because he already knew what the call was about, and he wasn't ready to talk about it in front of Maisie. The letter, 3 weeks ago, had been printed on heavy cream paper with a Halewood Foundation seal at the top. The board, it said, after 8 years of respecting his absolute privacy, was finally requesting, humbly and with deep gratitude, that he allow them to recognize him publicly. There would be a gala. There would be a medal, the first one the foundation had ever struck. They wanted to stop calling him the anonymous founder and start calling him by his name. He had read it twice and set it face down on the table and not touched it again for 4 days. The phone stopped buzzing. A voicemail icon appeared. He didn't tap it. "Who's Tabernathy?" Maisie asked through a mouthful of egg. "A man I used to work with. A long time ago. Are you going to call him back?" "Eventually." "That means no," said Maisie, who had cracked her father's code years ago and never let him forget it. He drove her to school in the truck, a 2004 pickup with a temperamental window and a heater that worked only when it was insulted first. And he let her pick the radio station, which meant they listened to a song about a girl who turns into a horse, or possibly a horse who turns into a girl. The lyrics were unclear, and Maisie did not care. At the drop-off loop, she kissed his cheek, told him to remember she had a science thing on Thursday, and disappeared into the building in a swirl of backpack and untied laces. He sat in the truck for a moment after she was gone. He always did. 1 minute, sometimes 2, just stillness, just the warm residue of having been somebody's whole world for the length of a car ride. Then he pulled back into traffic and rejoined the version of his life that paid the bills. His phone rang again at the next red light. Not Abernathy this time. "Diego, tell me you're free tonight," Diego said before Elias had finished saying hello. Diego ran a catering outfit and spoke exclusively in emergencies. Define free. "I'm down 3 servers. 3. One has the flu, 1 quit by text message, Elias like a coward, and 1 is, and I quote, finding herself in Sedona. I have the biggest event of my year tonight, and I am drowning. I need hands. I need your hands. Black slacks, white shirt. I'll give you a vest for hours cash, and I will name my next child after you. You don't have any children. I'll get one. Elias. Please." Elias almost said no. He had been planning a quiet night. Pasta, the one with the butter that Maisie liked, an early bedtime, maybe finally listening to Abernathy's voicemail with a glass of something. But he also had a heater that needed replacing before winter, and a science thing field trip fee due Thursday, and a man who lived close to the edge learns not to wave away 4 hours of cash. "Where's the event?" he asked. "Some charity thing downtown. Big foundation, fancy ballroom. You'll hate it. The Halewood Gala." Elias was quiet for exactly long enough that Diego said, "Hello? You still there?" "Yeah," Elias said. "I'm here." He looked at the road for a long moment. Somewhere in the back of his mind, 2 completely separate threads of his life, the quiet, ordinary one and the one he'd buried 8 years ago, were sliding toward each other in the dark, and a smarter or more cautious man might have seen the collision coming. But Elias just thought about the heater and the field trip and the strange, dark humor of the universe. "Okay," he said. "I'm in. What time?" The Halewood Foundation Gala was held in the Ashford Hall, a building designed to make ordinary people feel like they had wandered into a place they hadn't earned. The ceilings were 40 feet of gilt and glass. A chandelier hung at the center like a frozen explosion. Waiters moved through the crowd, carrying trays of things that were mostly air and ambition, and 300 of the city's most important people drifted between them in gowns and tuxedos, performing the particular theater of being seen, being generous. And at the center of all of it, conducting the entire performance with the cold precision of a woman who had never once in her life been allowed to drop the ball, was Vivian Sterling. She had been planning this gala for 14 months. Not because she loved planning galas, she found most of it tedious, but because this one mattered in a way the others hadn't. The Halewood Foundation was in trouble. Quiet trouble, the kind you don't announce, but trouble all the same. A bad year in the markets had gutted the endowment. The children's wing the foundation funded, the wing that kept the pediatric oncology floor running, that paid for the families who couldn't pay, was operating on numbers that made the accountants go pale. If tonight didn't work, real things would break. Not abstract things. Beds. Programs. The kind of help that doesn't get a second chance to exist. And there was one more reason tonight mattered. A reason Vivian could barely let herself think about directly, because thinking about it made her hands want to shake. He was coming. The founder. The man no one had ever met. 8 years ago, when the Halewood Children's Wing was nothing but a blueprint and a prayer, an anonymous donor had appeared out of nowhere and written the single largest private gift in the foundation's history. He'd asked for nothing. No name on the building. No seat on the board. No photograph. No plaque. No profile in the gala program. The gift came with exactly one condition, stated in a lawyer's careful hand: complete and permanent anonymity. For 8 years, the board had honored it. For 8 years, they had referred to him, in private, only as the founder, with the capital F you could hear in their voices. He had become a kind of legend, the ghost whose generosity held up the whole house. And 3 months ago, after years of gentle, persistent asking by old Theodore Abernathy, the man had finally agreed to be honored, to accept a medal, to let the foundation, just this once, say his name out loud. Tonight, which meant that somewhere in this glittering crowd, or arriving any moment, was a man worth more than anyone in the room and important enough to save the entire foundation with the stroke of a pen. And Vivian Sterling had decided, with the focused intensity she brought to everything, that this man was going to walk away from this evening utterly, completely impressed. "Has he checked in?" she asked for the 4th time, into the small earpiece that connected her to her staff. "No one matching the description, Miss Sterling," came the answer. The trouble was, there was no description. Theodore Abernathy was the only living person who knew what the founder looked like, and Theodore Abernathy, when asked, only smiled in that maddening way of his and said, "You'll know him when the time comes." "Hold on." She turned to the man hovering at her elbow, Roland Ashby, the foundation's executive director, a smooth and prosperous-looking man who wore his ambition like a good cologne, present but deniable. "Tell me the program is locked. Tell me nothing surprises me tonight." "The program is locked," Roland said. "Cocktails until 8, dinner service, the impact film." Then Abernathy gives the introduction and reveals our mystery guest, the medal, his remarks, and we go straight into the live auction while everyone's hearts are open and their wallets are looser. He smiled. It's choreographed to the minute. The only variable is the man himself, and that's Abernathy's department. What Roland did not say, what Roland had been very careful never to put in writing, was that he had his own plans for the founder's continued generosity. A new initiative, a flagship program with Roland's fingerprints all over the leadership and a budget that could comfortably absorb a salary or two. He just needed the old ghost to sign off on a much larger, much more flexible gift. Tonight, with the man finally in the room and basking in the gratitude of 300 admirers, seemed like the perfect night to ask. Vivian, who trusted Roland about as far as she could throw the chandelier, filed a smile away for later and turned back to the room. A waiter passed too close, nearly clipping her elbow with a tray. "Watch yourself," she said, without looking at him. The waiter murmured an apology and moved on, and Vivian Sterling did not give him a second thought, because to Vivian Sterling the waiters were furniture, and you do not look at furniture. The waiter was Elias Quinn. He had arrived through the loading dock at the back, the way the help always arrives, into a hot, clattering kitchen that smelled of garlic and panic. Diego had thrust a vest at him, slightly too small, and a tray, and a 30-second briefing. "Table service after dinner. Past hors d'oeuvres before. Don't make eye contact with the rich ones unless they make it first. Don't let your tray go below 10 items. Refill water before they ask. And whatever you do, do not spill anything on anyone, because some of these people are wearing more money than this building is worth." "You good?" "I'm good." "You sure? You look weird." "I always look weird." "You look weirder than usual." Elias didn't answer, because the honest answer was complicated. The honest answer was that he was standing in the kitchen of a building he had paid for, about to serve canapes to people who were here to celebrate a man they thought they'd never met, and that man was him. And in roughly 2 hours, an old lawyer was going to call his name in front of all of them and turn his quiet, carefully rebuilt life inside out. He had thought about telling Diego. He had thought about telling Abernathy he'd be there early, in disguise as the catering staff, just to walk through the Wings Gala one time without the weight of being seen. But Elias Quinn had spent 8 years learning that the simplest path through any situation was usually silence. And so he'd said nothing and put on the too small vest and picked up the tray and pushed through the swinging doors into the gold and the glass. And it had been, he would admit this to himself later, kind of wonderful for a while. because nobody looked at him. He moved through the most powerful crowd in the city like a man moving through a forest, invisible and free, and he got to watch. And watching had always been the thing Elias did best. He watched a senator pretend to remember a donor's name. He watched two women perform a friendship that was clearly a war. He watched a young man in an ill-fitting tuxedo work up the courage to talk to a girl, fail, retreat, and work it up again. He watched the great glittering machine of generosity grind away, and he found, to his surprise, that he wasn't bitter about it all. The money was here. Some of it would do real good. That was enough. He also watched the wing. Around the edges of the ballroom, on tall easels, the foundation had mounted photographs. Children in hospital beds, grinning, bald, brave. A nurse laughing with a kid hooked to an 4-pole, decorated like a robot. A wide shot of the wing itself, the bright atrium with the colored glass he'd insisted on, against the protests of every architect, because he'd wanted sick children to have something beautiful to look at that wasn't a ceiling tile. He stopped in front of one photo for a moment longer than a waiter should. It showed the playroom. In the corner of the frame, half out of focus, was a small mural of a sailboat. He had asked for that, too. Maisie had been an infant in this wing once. In the very first weeks, it was open, fighting something that had nearly taken her the way it had taken. "Are you lost?" The voice was cool and amused, and entirely without warmth. Elias turned. Vivian Sterling was looking at him the way you look at a stain you can't quite identify. "The hors d'oeuvres," she said, gesturing at his half-empty tray, "are meant to circulate. They're not meant to stand in front of a photograph having a moment. Are you having a moment?" "No, ma'am," Elias said. "Then circulate." She plucked something from his tray, examined it, and set it back down without eating it. "And tuck in your shirt. You look like you got dressed in a moving vehicle." He had, in fact, finished buttoning the shirt in the truck. He didn't mention this. He simply tucked it in, said, "Yes, ma'am," and moved on, and Vivian forgot him before he'd taken 3 steps. That was the first time. It would not be the last. Dinner was where it got worse. Elias had been assigned, by the cruel arithmetic of the seating chart, to the head table, the one nearest the stage, where Vivian sat with the senator and a movie producer and Roland Ashby and a clutch of the evening's most important guests, which meant that for the next 45 minutes, the woman who couldn't see him was directly, unavoidably in his orbit, and every small need of that table flowed through his hands. He poured the wine. He cleared the plates. He refilled the water before it was asked for, exactly as Diego had instructed. He did it all with the quiet, frictionless competence of a man who had spent years learning that doing a job well was its own kind of dignity, no matter how small the job. And Vivian Sterling found 100 small ways to remind him he was furniture. "This water has ice in it," she said, sliding the glass back toward him as though it had personally offended her. "I asked for no ice." "Did I not ask for no ice?" She had not asked for no ice. Elias replaced the water without ice. "The bread is cold." It was not cold. He brought warm bread. "You're hovering," she said, when he stood at the discreet distance servers are trained to keep. "Don't hover. It's unsettling." "You there." "Not you, the other one, yes. We need more wine at this end, and we needed it 5 minutes ago." A few people at the table noticed. The senator, to his credit, looked vaguely embarrassed and kept his eyes on his plate. But the movie producer found it funny, and Roland Ashby, sensing which way the wind blew, found it funny too, and laughter, once it's permitted at a table like that, tends to spread. The breaking point, the moment that would later make the whole room gasp, came over the wine. Elias was leaning in to refill the producer's glass when a woman 2 seats down gestured grandly, mid-anecdote, and her elbow caught the bottle in his hand. Not hard, just enough. A splash of red arced out and landed on the marble floor and on the hem of Vivian Sterling's gown. The table went quiet. Vivian looked down at the dark spot on midnight blue silk, and then up at Elias, and her face did something cold and final. "Are you serious?" she said. Not loud. She never had to be loud. "I'm sorry," Elias said. "Let me get something for her. Do you have any idea what this dress cost?" "No, of course you don't. Why would you?" She stood, the better to look down at him. "Here is what's going to happen. You're going to get down there. You're going to clean up the floor before someone breaks their neck on it. And then you're going to go find your supervisor and tell him that you will not be paid for tonight because this," she gestured at the stain at the floor at all of it, "is not what I'm paying for." A few people were watching now. A few phones came out, and Elias Quinn, who could have, with a single sentence, ended the woman's career, who could have said, "Take it out of the 11-figure gift I made to your dying foundation," looked at her for a long, level moment. Then he got down on one knee, and he cleaned up the wine. He did the way he did everything. Calmly. Completely. He gathered the glass into a napkin so no one would be cut. He blotted the marble until it shone. And when he stood, he didn't look angry or humiliated or anything a person performing for the watching crowd might have looked. He looked, if anything, a little sad. Not for himself. "Furniture doesn't kneel," he said quietly. It was so soft that only Vivian heard it. She blinked, caught off guard by the strange phrasing, but he had already turned and walked back toward the kitchen, and the moment passed, and she put out of her mind the way she put everything inconvenient out of her mind. It was, she would think much later, the most expensive sentence anyone had ever said to her. What Vivian didn't see, because Vivian never saw him, was where Elias went next. He didn't go to the kitchen. He went out a side door into a service corridor, and he stood there for a moment with his back against the cool wall and breathed, and a small voice from somewhere near his elbow said, "That lady was so mean to you." Elias looked down. Maisie Quinn was sitting on a folding chair in the corridor, swinging her legs, a juice box in one hand and a coloring book in the other. He had brought her because the sitter had fallen through at the last minute and Diego had a quiet office she could sit in, and she had been, by the terms of their deal, supposed to stay in that office. Maisie's relationship with the terms of deals was famously flexible. "You're supposed to be in Diego's office," he said. "I got bored. There's no windows." "How could a room have no windows? That's not even legal." She took a sip of her juice. "I came to find you, and then I saw that lady make you clean the floor, and I almost said something. I'm glad you didn't. Why didn't you say something? You always say be honest." Elias crouched down to her level, the way he always did because he had decided a long time ago that his daughter deserved to be talked to at eye level. Because sometimes, he said, the most honest thing you can do is just be calm and let people show you who they are, and not become someone worse just because they're being unkind. You understand? Maisie considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Kind of," she said, "but I still think you should have thrown the wine on her dress." Elias laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and the tightness in his chest eased. "There's the smile," said a new voice. Elias looked up. Theodore Abernathy was standing at the end of the corridor, leaning on his cane, 80 years old, and dressed in a tuxedo that had been excellent in 1985 and was excellent still. His face was a roadmap of decades, and his eyes were the sharpest thing in the building. "Theo," Elias said, standing. "You didn't answer my calls," the old man said mildly. "I was going to. You were going to listen to the voicemail at midnight after a glass of bourbon and feel guilty. I've known you 8 years, Elias. I know your methods." His gaze dropped to Maisie. "And who is this?" "Maisie Quinn," said Maisie, extending a small sticky hand with great formality. "I'm 7. "Theodore Abernathy," said the old man, shaking it just as formally. "I'm extremely old." Maisie beamed. Abernathy looked back at Elias, and his expression softened into something almost paternal. "I saw what happened at the table," he said, "from across the room. I couldn't get to you in time. Elias, say the word, and I will go up to that podium right now and tell that woman exactly who she's been." "No." Elias said it fast and firm. "No. Theo, look at me. You will not. That's the whole point. That's the entire point of the last 8 years. She made you kneel. She made a waiter kneel. She doesn't know there's any other man here." Elias rubbed a hand over his face. "I came tonight because you asked me to. Because you've been asking me for 3 years, and I finally couldn't keep saying no to you. But I'm not, Theo, I'm not built for the medal and the speeches and the photographs. I gave that money so it would disappear into something good. The second my name is attached to it, it becomes about me. And it was never supposed to be about me." Abernathy was quiet for a moment. "You know what tonight is really about," he said. "You know the numbers. You've seen the books." Elias had. He'd seen the books before he'd ever agreed to come. The wing was 11 months from a kind of slow, quiet collapse. I know, he said. Then you know that the thing that could save it isn't the metal, the old man said gently. It's the story. It's 300 of the richest people in this city watching a man they've never heard of be revealed as the soul of the thing they've all been pretending to care about. That moves money, Elias. The metal is theater. But theater is how this kind of place stays alive. He paused. All you have to do is let them see you. One time, that's all I'm asking. And if you decide you hate it, you can vanish again tomorrow, and I'll guard your secret to my grave, as I have done. Elias looked down at Maisie, who was pretending not to listen and listening with every cell in her body. Daddy built a hospital part, Maisie informed Abernathy in a stage whisper. For sick kids. He told me once when he thought I was asleep. Abernathy's eyes went bright and wet. Did he said softly. Did he indeed? I was a sick kid here, Maisie added matter-of-factly, in the way children deliver the things that should break your heart. When I was a baby, I don't remember it. But Mom, she stopped, and her small face did something careful, the way it always did around the edge of that subject. Mom didn't get a hospital part in time, so Daddy built one, so other moms would. The corridor was very quiet. Elias put his hand on his daughter's head and looked at his old friend, and something in him gave way, not entirely, but enough. One time, he said, I'll let them see me one time. Abernathy let out a breath he might have been holding for 3 years. Thank you, he said. He straightened, and the showman came back into him, the old foundation man who had been wrangling generosity out of the wealthy for half a century. Now, there's been a small change to the program that I did not tell you about because I knew you'd object. Elias narrowed his eyes. How? I'm going to read your name from the stage, not the anonymous founder. Your name, Elias Quinn, and then I'm going to ask you to come up. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who has spent 80 years learning exactly how much theater a moment can hold. I want them to have to find you. I want them to look around this room for a titan, and I want them to slowly realize that the man they've been looking for has been right here in front of them the whole night, carrying their plates. Elias stared at him. You're a cruel old man, Elias said. I'm a fundraiser, said Abernathy, with dignity. We are the same thing. You check an antique watch. 20 minutes. Finish your shift, Elias. Pour the wine. Be furniture a little longer. And then, the old eyes gleamed, stop being furniture. He turned and made his slow way back toward the ballroom. Maisie watched him go. I like him, she announced. He's old, but he's got good plans. The lights came down. The impact film played on the great screens above the stage. 3 minutes of children's faces, of a nurse's voice talking about the day the wing opened, of a mother saying, I don't know what we would have done. By the end of it, the room was silent in the particular way a room of cynical people goes silent when something true sneaks past their defenses. Vivian Sterling, standing at the side of the stage, watched the crowd's faces in the screen light and felt the machinery of the evening doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Hearts opening, wallets loosening. The room was ready. She stepped to the podium. The applause was warm. She was, whatever else you could say about her, magnificent at this, poised, luminous, exactly the right amount of emotional. 8 years ago, she began, this foundation received a gift. Not the largest gift in dollars that any charity has ever recorded, but for us, it was everything. It built a wing. It built hope. And it came from a man none of us has ever met. A man who asked for nothing in return. Not a name on a wall. Not a seat at this table. Nothing but the knowledge that sick children and the families who love them would be cared for. The room was wrapped. Vivian let the pause breathe. For 8 years, we have honored his wish for privacy. And for 8 years, I will confess to you, I have wondered. I've imagined him. A few warm chuckles. I've pictured a great industrialist. A reclusif financier. Some titan of business who decided, late in life, to do one beautiful thing. She smiled. Tonight, at last, he has given us permission to thank him properly, to put a name and a face to the soul of this foundation. And so it is my deepest honor to hand this podium to the only person who has ever known his identity, our beloved Theodore Abernathy, to make the introduction we have waited 8 years to hear. The applause swelled. Abernathy made his way to the podium with his cane, slow, and deliberate, milking every second of it the way only an old master can. He adjusted the microphone. He took a single index card from his breast pocket and held it in fingers that trembled with age and with something else. He looked out over the sea of expectant faces, 300 of the most important people in the city, all of them craning to see which silver-haired magnate would rise from which table. Near the side of the room, half hidden by a service column, a man in a too-small vest stood holding a tray of water glasses and watched. "I have known this man," Abernathy began, his old voice carrying, "for 8 years. I'm the only person in this room who has. And I want to tell you, before I say his name, 3 things about him." He held up one trembling finger. "He has never, not once, allowed me to thank him." 2. Second finger. "He gave nearly everything he had, and then he chose to live a small and quiet life, and raise his daughter, and ask nothing more from any of you." And 3. He lowered his hand and looked out at the room, and his voice dropped, and 300 people leaned forward as one. 3. He's in this room right now. He has been with you all evening, and I would wager that most of you have looked straight through him. A confused murmur rippled across the ballroom. People glanced at their neighbors. Asterisk right here, with us, all evening. Asterisk Vivian, at the side of the stage, frowned, a small line appearing between her perfect brows. With us all evening. What did that mean? She scanned the head table. She scanned the donors. She was already, without quite knowing it, beginning to feel the floor tilt. Abernathy lifted the index card, though he did not need it. He had known the name for 8 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the founder of the Halewood Children's Wing, the man we have been honoring tonight. His name," the room held its breath, "is Elias Quinn. Elias, would you come up here, son?" For one full second, nothing happened. 300 people looked around the room, searching for a man who would rise from a seat of honor. No one rose. And then, slowly, near the side of the room, by the service column, a man in a too-small server's vest set down his tray of water glasses on the nearest table. He reached up and untied the vest, and folded it once, neatly, and laid it over the back of a chair. And he straightened, and for the first time all evening, he was not furniture. He was just a tall, quiet man with sad, steady eyes, looking back at 300 people who were now staring at him with the dawning, vertiginous horror of a crowd realizing it has gotten something catastrophically wrong. Somewhere in that silence came a sharp, bright sound, the unmistakable shatter of crystal against marble. Vivian Sterling had dropped her glass. But here is the thing she would remember for the rest of her life. When her glass shattered, she did not look down at it. She could not, because she was staring at the waiter she had made kneel, the man whose pay she had threatened to dock, whose shirt she had told to tuck in, whose existence she had not for 1 second considered worth a glance. And she was watching him walk, calm and unhurried, through a parting sea of the most powerful people in the city, toward the stage, toward the medal, toward his name. And not one person in that ballroom was looking at the broken glass on the floor. They were all looking at the waiter. It would have been easy for the room to feel like a trial. It didn't, because the man at the center of it refused to let it be one. Elias climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Abernathy met him with both hands and gripped his arm, and there was a wet shine in the old man's eyes that he didn't bother to hide. Elias took the medal from the velvet box, a heavy disc of bronze, the first the foundation had ever made, and held it in his hand, looking at it, and then he stepped to the podium and looked out at the silent room. He didn't speak right away. He let the silence sit. He had learned, over a lifetime, that the things that matter most are the ones you don't rush. "My name is Elias Quinn," he finally said. His voice wasn't a Titan's voice. It was a quiet man's voice, a little rough, the voice of someone who spent more time listening than speaking. "About an hour ago, I cleaned wine off this floor. I want you to keep that in mind for a minute, because it matters to what I'm going to say." A few uncomfortable laughs. Near the stage, Vivian Sterling stood absolutely still, her face the color of the marble. 8 years ago, I had a wife named Cora and a baby daughter named Maisie. Maisie got sick when she was 11 weeks old. The kind of sick where they take you into a small room and use a gentle voice, and you learn to hate gentle voices. He turned the medal over in his hand. There's a hospital in this city with a pediatric wing that could have treated her. There was. But it was full, and it was underfunded, and it was the kind of place that had to turn families away, and there was no room for an 11-week-old with no name anyone recognized. So we drove 3 hours to another city to a place that had a bed. He paused. Maisie made it. She's here tonight, actually. She's in a back room with a coloring book, and she's almost certainly not where I left her. A ripple of soft, aching laughter. My wife didn't make it. Not that night. She was fine that night. But Cora had been sick too, in a quieter way that we'd been ignoring because we were so frightened for the baby, and by the time we slowed down enough to notice, he stopped and breathed, and the whole room breathed with him. It was a different small room and a different gentle voice. Cora died 14 months later. She was 31. The silence in the Ashford Hall was total. Now, here's the part one need you to understand. Before all of that, I'd had some luck. I'd built a company, and I'd sold it, and there was more money than a person like me knew what to do with. And after Cora died, I looked at that money, and I looked at my daughter, and I made a decision. He set the medal down on the podium. I decided I never wanted another family to drive 3 hours in the dark because the wing in their own city was full. So I gave nearly all of it to build one. Here, the wing some of you toured tonight. The one with the colored glass and the sailboat in the playroom. His voice caught just slightly. Cora liked sailboats. He looked out at them, and there was no anger in his face. There was something far more disarming than anger. And then I gave away my name with the money, he said, on purpose, because I didn't want a wing named after my grief. I didn't want to be a figure. I wanted to raise my daughter and drive my truck and be a regular man and have the good thing exist without me standing in front of it taking a bow. So I took ordinary jobs. I fixed things. I delivered things. And tonight, when a friend was short-staffed, I served wine at a gala. And you want to know the truth? Avent, Sut smiled. It was the best seat in the house, because nobody looks at the waiter. And when nobody's looking at you, you get to see everything. He let that land. He did not look at Vivian. He didn't have to. Everyone else was looking at her. I saw a lot of generosity in this room tonight, Elias went on. Real generosity. People who came here to do good and meant it. I also saw the other thing. The thing where we decide a person's worth by the cut of their jacket, or the car they drove, or whether they're holding a tray. We all do it. I've done it. It's the easiest, laziest math in the world, and almost every time it's wrong. He picked the medal back up, so I'll accept this. Not for me, for Cora, and for the families who never had to make that drive. But I'll ask you to do one thing in exchange. The next time you look straight through somebody, the waiter, the driver, the kid in the cheap vest, I want you to remember that you have absolutely no idea who you're standing next to. None. You never do. He stepped back from the podium. For a heartbeat, the room didn't react at all, stunned past the point of applause. Then the senator stood up, and then the producer, and then the whole room was on its feet, 300 of the most powerful people in the city standing and applauding a man in black slacks and a white shirt with no vest, and the sound of it rolled off the gilt ceiling like weather. And at the side of the stage, Vivian Sterling stood among the shards of her own glass, not applauding because her hands were pressed over her mouth, and on her face was the particular total devastation of a person who has just watched, in real time and in front of everyone she knows, the precise shape of her own smallness. The auction that followed broke every record the Foundation had ever set. It wasn't subtle why. 300 people had just been handed a story they would be telling at dinner parties for a decade. I was there, I saw it. He'd been pouring the wine all night, and people who had just been moved and who are also slightly desperate to be seen as the kind of person who was moved opened their checkbooks. By the time Roland Ashby tallied the night's totals, the wing was not 11 months from collapse anymore. It was funded for years, funded into something solid. Roland, it should be said, did not get his flexible new initiative. He had cornered Elias for 90 seconds in a side hall, pivoting fluidly from the script he'd prepared for a reclusive magnate into a warmer, folksier pitch suited to a salt-of-the-earth single dad, and he'd gotten about 4 sentences in before Elias said, mildly, I read the proposal you circulated to the board last spring, the one with the leadership structure. Roland's smile had frozen. I read everything, Mr. Ashby. It's a habit. I'd take a hard look at how that initiative's overhead was costed if I were the board. And he nodded, polite as anything, and walked away, and Roland had stood in the side hall feeling the specific cold of the man who has just learned that the ghost he thought was a soft touch had been reading his mail for years. But all of that was happening at the edges. At the center of the evening, in a quiet corner near the coat check, two people were having a much smaller and much more important conversation. Vivian had found him there. He was crouched down, helping Maisie back into the left sneaker that had, against all odds, gone missing a second time in a single day. He looked up when Vivian's shadow fell across them, and his face was unreadable. "Mr. Quinn," she said. Her voice, the famous instrument she could play a boardroom with, was not steady. You don't have to," he said. "Edo." She swallowed. Up close, without the performance, she looked younger and tired, and like a person rather than a portrait. "I made you kneel. On that floor. In front of everyone. I told you wouldn't be paid. I never once. I didn't look at you. Not once the entire night. And the whole time she stopped. She made herself say it. I built 14 months of my life around impressing you. And you were standing right in front of me, and I treated you like you were nothing. There isn't an apology big enough for that. But I'm giving you the one I have. I'm so sorry. I was cruel, and I was wrong, and I have no excuse." Elias finished tying Maisie's shoe. He stood up slowly. "You're not the first," he said. "It wasn't unkind. It was almost gentle. I've been invisible for 8 years. You'd be amazed how many people you can stand next to when you're holding a tray. Most of them are perfectly decent the moment they actually look at you. The trouble is the looking. That's not an excuse for me." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He let that sit, not to punish her, but because he wasn't in the habit of softening true things. But I'll tell you what I told my daughter earlier tonight. When somebody's unkind to you, the most honest thing you can do is stay calm and let them show you who they are." He looked at her steadily. "You showed me who you were at that table, and now you're standing here when you could have just gone home and let the moment pass, showing me something different. So which one's the real Vivian Sterling?" It was not a rhetorical question. He genuinely seemed to want to know. "I don't know," she said after a moment, and it was maybe the most honest thing she'd said all year. "I think I've been the table version for a long time. I think I forgot there was another one." Maisie, who had been watching this entire exchange with the unblinking attention of a small forensic scientist, chose this moment to deliver her verdict. "You're the lady who was mean to my dad," she announced. Vivian's face crumpled. "Yes," she said. "I was. I'm very sorry. I was having a bad day, but that's not a good reason." Maisie considered this with the full machinery of her 7-year-old judgment. She looked at her father. She looked back at Vivian. She looked, with great significance, at Vivian's shoes. "You have nice shoes, though," Maisie offered, by way of partial pardon. Vivian let out a sound that was half a laugh and half something wetter. "Thank you," she said. "Daddy, she has nice shoes." "I heard, Bug. They're nicer than ours." "Almost everything is nicer than ours," Elias agreed, and Maisie nodded, satisfied that justice and accuracy had both been served. There was a pause then, the kind that has more in it than the words around it. Vivian looked at the two of them, the quiet man and the small, fierce girl with the twice-lost shoe, and felt something shift in her chest that had been calcified so long she'd forgotten it could move. "I like to do something," she said. "Not money. You don't need money. Obviously, that's the most absurd thing I could offer you. But the wing. The expansion you've never let anyone build because you didn't want your name on it. I like to make that my actual job. Not the galas. The real work. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like your help. Quietly. However you want. Because nobody understands that place the way you do, and I've spent 14 months pretending to." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said slowly, "is a much better offer than money." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and Vivian Sterling, who had been getting yes, she didn't deserve her whole life, found that she vastly preferred the maybe of a man who meant it. The weeks after were quieter, but quiet in a new way. Vivian did not send out a company-wide email about humility. She didn't commission a sensitivity seminar or post a long reflective thread for the world to admire. She simply began to behave differently in ways small enough that only a careful watcher would have caught them. She started asking the names of the people who served her coffee. She started reading the proposals before the meetings instead of skimming them during. She fired Roland Ashby in March, after the forensic audit Elias had quietly suggested turned up exactly what Elias had quietly suspected, and she did it without theater, which was its own kind of growth. Theodore Abernathy, who had been watching her with the detached interest of an old fundraiser studying a long shot, mentioned it to no one. He just noted it and went back to reading everything twice the way he always had. And Elias went back to his life because his life was the thing he had chosen and kept choosing. He fixed the truck's heater before winter. He took Maisie on the science field trip on Thursday and got mild food poisoning from a gas station burrito, which Maisie found hysterical. He read papers on pediatric care funding late at night after she was asleep, not because he had to, but because the pattern still pleased him. He let the medal sit in a drawer next to a folded crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, and he did not take it out very often, but he did not throw it away, either. The Halewood Children's Wing broke ground on its expansion in the spring. There was no plaque with Elias's name on it. There was, at his quiet request, a second sailboat painted in the new playroom. It was a Saturday in May when the last piece settled into place. Maisie's school had a spring fair, bake sale, ring toss, a bouncy castle that the parents trusted slightly less than the children did. Elias was manning the lemonade table, which he had volunteered for, because a man who can read the architecture of $1 billion contract can certainly run a lemonade table, and because Maisie had informed him that this was non-negotiable. He looked up and saw a woman walking across the grass toward him, and it took him a second to place her, because she wasn't wearing a gown or a boardroom or a performance. She was in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair down, holding a paper cup, looking faintly unsure of herself in a way the old Vivian Sterling would never have permitted. "I heard there was a lemonade situation," she said. "I came to help." "Did Maisie text you?" Elias said. "Maisie absolutely texted me. From your phone. I'm fairly sure she has my number memorized, which is mildly alarming. She has everyone's number memorized. It's a whole thing." He handed her a pitcher and an apron. "We're losing money on every cup. Don't try to fix the pricing. She said it personally, and she will know." Vivian laughed, the real one, the one she'd been finding more often lately, and tied on the apron and stepped in beside him, and for a while they just poured lemonade and made change and didn't say anything that needed saying, because some things find their own pace and won't be rushed. Across the field, Maisie spotted them. She was at the ring toss, ponytail half undone as always, and she went very still for a second, the way children do when they're recalibrating their entire understanding of the world. Then her whole face opened into the kind of uncomplicated delight that adults spend their lives trying to get back to, and she waved at her father and then, deliberately, at Vivian. A big, unreserved, two-armed wave. Vivian raised her hand and waved back. It cost her nothing and meant more than she'd expected. "She likes you," Elias said, watching his daughter. "For the record, Maisie's verdict is final and it can't be appealed, and she's decided she likes you. I'd take it seriously if I were you. She was wrong about a person exactly once, and she still won't discuss it. And you?" Vivian asked, before she could lose her nerve. "What's your verdict?" Elias was quiet for a moment, pouring a cup of lemonade for a small boy who couldn't see over the table. He handed it down, made the change, watched the kid run off. "I think," he said carefully, "that I spent 8 years deciding the safest thing was to be invisible. And I think being invisible was a way of not having to find out who'd bother to look." He glanced at her. "You came to a lemonade table in jeans. Nobody made you do that. There's no gala here. No checkbook, no medal, nobody watching." A small smile. "So you're not performing. Which means I'm finally meeting the other Vivian Sterling. The one I asked about that night. And I like her a lot better than the one at the table," he said. "We eat early. 6 o'clock. Maisie makes us watch the horse show, and you don't get a vote." He handed her the next cup to pour. "If that's a reasonable thing to offer. To both of you." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And in the long, careful arithmetic of 2 guarded people learning to be seen, One who had spent a lifetime being looked at and never noticed, and one who had spent a lifetime noticing and refusing to be looked at. The distance between not a yes and not a no turned out to be almost nothing at all. Maisie, watching from across the field, had already done the math. She'd done it weeks ago. If this story moved you, if you felt that catch in your chest when the old man read his name, or when the glass hit the floor and the whole room turned the wrong way, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because we tell one of these every week. The quiet ones, the underestimated ones, the people the world looks straight through right up until the moment it can't anymore. Your support is what lets us keep telling them. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have said if you were the waiter on your knees that night? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.